When we first set out to film our documentary, we weren't exactly sure what we would do. We had the idea to interview one person from 3 different neighborhoods in Chicago with high immigrant populations, but that could end up in many ways, so we didn't really have a frame to follow. Therefore, we set out on February 6th to get our 3 interviews, one in Logan Square, historically German, one in Pilsen, historically Hispanic, and one in Westtown, historically Polish. We met at the SAC at 8:30 a.m., and with barely any energy and motivation, we headed towards Logan Square on the CTA. You know, there's something about Chicago that just makes you wake up and energizes you to keep going. It might be the busy streets and the excitement of the windy city, or perhaps it's just the goddamn cold. But as soon as we were on our way, I did not feel tired. Once in Logan Square, we looked around the streets as we got some B-roll for the documentary. However, we soon realized we did not know who to interview. We tried the German museum.
Here at 10 a.m.
Okay.
And then she opens up the museum.
Okay.
So if you guys want to come back at that time, her
Okay.
name is Rosa Gallagher, and she'd be more than happy to, show you the space and all
Perfect. Thank you so much.
But it didn't open until much later. And we also tried a nearby cafe, but the owner said we couldn't even film there. After suffering great defeat at Logan Square, we decided to move on to Westtown and prayed that the Polish might take more kindly to our offer. And thankfully, they did. In Westtown, we immediately went to the Polish American Museum, and what a great decision that was. Once inside, we were introduced to this wonderful Polish American museum guide named Beatrix Czerkawski. This woman was patient enough to entertain us for 2 hours, talking about Polish history, culture, and even her own family's story as she showed us around the museum. What began as a tiring day became a day where we all learned new things that we never even imagined, and we met a wonderful and kind Polish-American woman who is proud of where she comes from. This is the story of the Polish Museum of America.
Like giant numbers. Do you know anything about Polish history? How old was Poland? How many centuries?
How many centuries?
Yeah, take a wild guess.
Probably like 10, not 10.
You're perfect. 10 centuries. That's exactly the answer.
Really?
Yes. It's over 1,000 years old, Poland.
Once the tour started, Beatrix talked about how Poland has a long and brutal history. After being conquered by several of its neighbors, the resilience of the Polish people shines through. She showed us the largest stained glass window in the U.S. Pieces of the stained glass window were shipped individually for the World Fair in 1949. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing conflict in Europe at that time, it wasn't shipped back.
My father, if you look into that book, his picture is maybe in there, but he was the youngest soldier of the Polish armed forces in the West. My dad was a teenager during World War II, and remember all those fronts I mentioned? So my dad, with the Polish armed forces, fought in Syria in one Polish unit. They went to Palestine because Palestine was under the British jurisdiction in the Middle East. There's no Israel yet. So the British colonized the Middle East, and what happens with the Polish armed forces in the West? They, my dad's unit, which was called the Carpathian Brigade, turns into a division, and the Polish Carpathian, the 3rd Polish Division of Carpathian Riflemen, kick General Rommel, the Desert Fox, out of North Africa. Yeah. They win all the battles of North Africa, battles like Gazala, Tobruk, Alexandria, El Alamein, Mersa Matruh, all these battles where German strongholds are holding forts, and so the Poles kicked them out of them. They kicked them out of there, and my dad was one of the teenage soldiers that took part in that battle. The Poles liberated many cities, including Bologna in the north. And what happens next? My dad comes to the U.S., and he can't go back to Poland because his part is occupied now by Russia. And so my mom was also in the military. They meet, and me and my sister are born here in Chicago.
Despite being constantly under the yoke of imperialist powers,
Poland managed to retain its identity as a strong military power. Poland's military strategies even influenced the U.S. Tadeusz Kościuszko, a formidable Polish general, was recruited to establish one of the best military academies in the States today, West Point. Not only this, but Kościuszko left his American estate to be spent on freeing and educating slaves, which was unheard of in the time of the United States because he was appalled by the practice.
Ignacy Jan Paderewski, a beloved pianist, composer, and Prime Minister of Poland in 1919, played frequently in Chicago in the 1930s. He was an envied, more than respected artist. Other pianists desperately wanted to be like him. He was also close friends with President Woodrow Wilson and signed the Treaty of Versailles. During World War I, Paderewski became a member of the Polish National Committee and was then appointed its representative to the United States, where he urged President Wilson to support the cause of Polish independence. Paderewski's spirit embodied the spirit of Poland.
The photos here are of our neighborhood. This is exactly where you are. Augusta Boulevard, Division, Milwaukee. This is about 1912, 1910. You see the soldiers marching. This is basically a military campaign to attract Polish Americans in the neighborhood to join the Blue Army. Remember? You know all about the Blue Army now. Okay. You have tents that were set up like on corners of Chicago streets, businesses, to attract young people who wanted to join the Blue Army.
Even though this documentary had initially focused on immigrant settlements in Chicago, all of us were inspired by Beatrix's love for her country. We walked through the halls of Poland's past and realized how much of its history had been erased from books. There is much to be learned about Poland's history, and this documentary attempts to allow everyone a brief look at just that, as well as be inspired by Poland's perseverance and its relentless optimism, just like we were. It says I'm drunk.
This is the charm of Lincoln Square. This is the Germans' culture.
Not really.
I wish I was drunk.
And look, it's a piece of meat.
Is it?
Yeah, look.
I
Yep.
thought it was a pancake or a waffle.
No, look. There's the bone.
Sure, that's supposed
the
to be a
meat.
bone. That's supposed to be a bone, sure.